Blessed be everyone, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to be doing a little bit more of a shadow work conversation, this time focusing on the role of the ego. But before we dive into that, hi, I'm Sandra from mysterywitchschool.com. If you're new to the channel and you want to know more about Wicca and witchcraft, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so that you don't miss any videos. If you are wanting to bring Wicca more into your life and practice it as a way of life, then do have a look at my free video, How to Start Your Wiccan Practice. It just helps you know where to start and how to pace yourself as you're learning your way through all of the rituals and processes that we use in the craft. The shadow is that part of ourselves that we don't want to own, or that we're completely unaware of. It pretty much is the ego aspect of ourselves. Now, the ego tends to get a bit of a bad rap, and to a large extent it deserves it, and I'll tell you why in this video. But there are positive aspects to the ego, and I'll start with the positive aspects first. The ego is designed to keep us safe. That's its total role in our lives: keep us safe. Keep us alive, keep us safe, so that we can do what we came here to do. Even to figure out what we came here to do. All the ego should be doing is helping you stay safe. The ego is not meant to be your master. It's not meant to be the one that is in charge of you. The part of you that should really be helping you walk your path as you go through life is your higher self, your inner self, your true self, whatever you want to call it. It's that part of you that can stand back and look at things and experience things more objectively and coming more from a neutral place. It's the observing self, and it's the part of you that can observe your thoughts, your emotions, and even what's going on in your physical body. Don't confuse the ego with that part of yourself, because the ego thinks it's the higher self a lot of the time. The ego thinks that it is the true self. And that's when we can get into a lot of problems with regards to creating conflicts in our lives and attracting conflicts in our lives. So the ego's positive aspect is protection, and we need to acknowledge that. We need an ego, but when it thinks it's the master, which in most cases it does, then the ego is a tyrant, an absolute tyrant and an absolute trickster and a villain. Now, it is only doing these things to keep us safe, but what it does in the process of being these things is it just creates a mess. Our egos are programmed mostly between the ages of 0 and 6 years of age. The ego is incredibly suggestible, as our subconscious mind is incredibly suggestible. The ego is very easily hypnotized and coerced into believing things and perceiving the world in a certain way. So the ego makes us vulnerable to seeing the world in a way that perhaps a more dominant group of people may see it, or a way that seems to be easier for us to navigate through the world when it may not actually be so. So keep in mind that the ego is something you do have to keep track of. And this is where shadow work comes in. Shadow work helps you be able to see more clearly what's your ego and what is more your higher self. Now, most of us cannot sustain being in our more true, higher self all of the time. It's pretty difficult to be in that position, because that would mean essentially that you're enlightened. And I'm certainly not enlightened, and I don't know anyone who is. I've never met anybody who is enlightened. So I don't know what that even looks like. I certainly don't know what it feels like, because my ego still likes to run the show and come in sometimes when I'm not watching it. So it's like you've got to keep one eye open on the ego, and often it sneaks past. So don't expect perfection when you're dealing with the ego. Just know that, yeah, the ego is it's going to jump in and it's going to do things and it's going to mess up, and don't beat yourself up or judge yourself or shame yourself for that happening, because it happens to all of us and it continues to happen to all of us. What we're doing through shadow work is just trying to have it happen less, and for us to have more of an understanding of who we truly are. One of the main things about the ego that we need to really be aware of, and throughout the ages this has been obvious, but particularly with the astrological energy that's around us at the moment and for the next few years, is that it makes us very suggestible to a lot of psychosis and hysteria that may be going on in the world. Now, when you think back to the days of the witch trials and the witch hunts back in the Renaissance, you had absolute mass psychosis and mass hysteria, and people being burned at the stake for things they didn't even do, because people were afraid. What was afraid? The ego was afraid. The church had so much power back then and was so hell-bent on being a dominant force, they had their own agenda at the time, that they were able to coerce and persuade people through their narratives and through their fear-mongering that people who were witches were evil and were causing all of the problems in their lives. The ego, being so suggestible and so responsive to fear-mongering, which it is, would then take that pill and swallow it and believe it. Now, when we look back on those times, we look at that and think, what were these people thinking? They were crazy. How could you believe a lot of the stuff that these people were accused of doing? What we don't realize is that we're always vulnerable to this, and it's the ego that makes us vulnerable to this. So unless we can step aside and look at things from a more neutral point of view, we are all vulnerable to falling into the mindset of believing anything that's going on around us that may be causing us to feel fear and to feel insecure. So that means religious ideologies, political ideologies, social ideologies. We need to be able to step back and look at them and go, hey, what's the truth here? Because the ego will get swept away, and the energy, the inquisitional energy, is around us at the moment astrologically. So we need to be careful that we don't end up getting burnt at the stake, probably more figuratively now rather than literally, and that we're not the ones burning other people at the stake because we're getting caught up into a lot of fear-driven narratives that may be going on around us. The ego always wants to feel like it is safe, and the way that we humans feel safe is to belong to other human groups. One of the really frightening things for a human is to be ostracized from a larger group. There's a fear within us of having to go it alone and survive on our own, because we are generally a social species. So this means that the ego will do anything in its power to feel good and to do what needs to be done in order to feel like it's a safe part of a group. The ego is very good at being a trickster, and it's a good deceiver. So it can change your mind. It can make you think that some of your actions are actually good when they may not necessarily be good. And this is where we run into that craziness, like back in the Inquisitional times in the Renaissance and Middle Ages, where people were accusing their neighbours of being witches when they weren't, and doing all sorts of crazy things because their ego wanted to feel safe, and their ego wanted to feel good, and their ego wanted to belong to the group. So what were they doing? They were dobbing people in to be tortured and burned at the stake. But they still felt good about it because the narrative at the time was good people dob witches in, and burning witches is a good thing. That's how ridiculous it can be. And as human beings, we haven't changed. So we're still suggestible in this way. So we've always got to keep one eye open about the ego and what it's telling us. What is it doing in our lives right now? What is it telling us about ourselves? And what is it telling us about the world around us? And where is the true self in all of this? Shadow work will help you learn to listen to the ego and understand when it really is trying to keep you safe and it's doing it in a productive way. And also knowing when the ego is trying to keep you safe and it's actually causing you to be somewhat deceptive and maybe even quite nasty and horrible in order for you to feel safe. And this is very challenging work because none of us want to think that we've got these bad characteristics, right? We don't want to think that we can be manipulative. We don't want to think that we can be nasty to somebody else simply to feel safe and to feel part of a group. That part of us, our ego, is quite happy to say, that person bad, that person should be punished. When we don't even really know what that person may have done, and when you look at it in a more rational way, that person may have not really done anything at all except maybe give an opinion that happened to be different from our own, made us feel insecure, and so we need to lash out at that person because our ego feels threatened. Our ego will identify ourselves with all sorts of earthly things. So we will identify with how we dress. We will identify with how we speak. We will identify with what car we drive. We will identify with all of these material aspects. And when we become identified with these things, that's the ego, because none of these things we can take with us when we die. So if we're feeling threatened, our identity is feeling threatened, our sense of who we think we are is being threatened, then we need to go, oh, time for shadow work, because the true self can never be threatened. The true self is eternal, so it'll never be threatened. So it doesn't have anything to worry about. But the ego, it does have something to worry about, because if it feels threatened, it is not going to feel good, and it's also going to cause you to not only feel unhappy, miserable, angry, resentful, it's also going to cause you perhaps at times to lash out and do things that maybe later you would regret. So that's why shadow work is important. So enough about the ego and shadow work. If you are interested in doing shadow work and looking at ways of being more in touch with your true self, then you can book a one-on-one clarity session with me. We can talk together and see whether we're a fit to work together. If you want to do that, I will put my email in the description field below this video. It is a free half hour where you get to speak to me about anything that you may be wanting to achieve in your life, but you're finding you're holding yourself back. And it's something that perhaps you've done a lot of work on in the past and you just can't seem to get past it, because it will be the ego that is in your way for sure. So if you like the video, hit the like button, share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe. I'm Sandra from mysterywitchschool.com. Blessed be.